Good day everyone, I am Diane the Numeron, and for today's report, I will be discussing content standards and performance standards under the K-12 curriculum framework. And before we begin, let us first look at what we are expected to learn from this discussion. So at the end of this lesson, we should be able to define content standards and performance standards, differentiate the two, and give examples of content and performance standards. So let us begin. So what is a content standard? A content standard describes the knowledge and understanding that students are expected to acquire in a particular subject area. In simple words, it tells us what students should learn. For example, if we are teaching English, a content standard may require students to understand different parts of speech, sentence structures, or reading strategies. Content standards also describe the specific content that should be taught and learned. They identify the important knowledge and skills that students need to master. In other words, content standards serve as a guide for teachers. They help teachers identify the knowledge and skills that learners need to develop during the lesson. So when we talk about content standards, we're basically asking what should students know and what should students be able to do. Content standards also focus on the most important and lasting ideas, principles, skills, and ways of thinking that learners need to understand. To make it easier to understand, think of content standards as a destination of learning. They tell the teacher that knowledge and skills should be included in the lesson. For example, if the lesson is about parts of speech, the content standard may expect students to understand nouns, verbs, adjectives, and other parts of speech. So the important question of content standard is, what should the learners learn? Now that we have understood content standards, let us proceed to performance standards. So what is a performance standards? A performance standards specifies the expected level of performance that students should demonstrate when applying their knowledge and skills. In simple terms, performance standards tells us what students should be able to do with what they have learned. Performance standards also define the level of work that demonstrates whether students have achieved the expected standard. They also provide clear expectations for instruction, assessment, and student work. For example, if the students have learned about parts of speech, they should not only be able to identify nouns and verbs, they should also be able to use them correctly in sentences or in an actual writing activity. This shows that they can apply what they have learned. Performance standards also help teachers assess how much students have learned and how well they can apply the skills they acquired. A simple way to remember performance standard is how well students can use what they know. Performance standard answer the question, how well must students perform their work? So they usually involve a product or activity demonstration or performance that serves as evidence of learning. Now, let us differentiate the two. The main difference is their focus. Content standards focus on knowledge and skills. They tell us what students are expected to learn and understand. On the other hand, performance standards focus on application and demonstration. They tell us what students should be able to do using the knowledge and skills they have learned. For example, if our lesson is about writing a paragraph, the content standard may focus on understanding the elements of a good paragraph, such as the topic sentence, supporting details, and concluding sentence. The performance standard, on the other hand, may require the students to write their own well-organized paragraph using those elements. So the content standard focuses on the learning, while the performance standard focuses on the demonstration of that learning. So why are they important? Content standards and performance standards are both important parts of the K-12 curriculum. Content standards helps teachers identify what learners should know and understand. Performance standards, meanwhile, help teachers identify what learners should be able to do and demonstrate. Together, these standards guide teacher in planning their lessons and activity. They also help teachers create appropriate assessment to determine whether students have achieved and expected learning outcomes. In short, these standards make teaching and learning more organized because they provide clear expectations for both teachers and learners. To summarize everything we have discussed, content standards focus on the knowledge and skills that learners are expected to acquire, while performance standards focus on the ability of learners to apply and demonstrate what they have learned. Content standards answer what should students know and learn, while performance standards answer how well should students be able to demonstrate what they have learned. Therefore, both are important because they work together to make learning meaningful and measurable. As future teachers, understanding these standards is important because they will help us plan effective lessons, create appropriate activities, and assess our students' learning. And that concludes my report about content standards and performance standards in the K-12 curriculum framework. So thank you for listening and God bless.